Yeah, they've got CGU and RMA, a few other ones like that.
All right, I think we can get started. So my name is Kajan Moorthy, and we've got Desai here from Relic. So what we're going to talk about today, and this can be a hands-on lab, so feel free to get your laptops out or just watch what we do. So it's up to you guys how interactive you want it to be. So what we're going to go through today is go through a sample set of applications on how to get that deployed, and then more importantly, how to actually instrument that with OpenTelemetry, and what that data actually looks like in New Relic. So when we talk about instrumenting anything, in this example, it's going to be a set of microservices, but it's really the same regardless of what it is. So if you're using APIs, if you're using web applications, web front ends, it's all going to really work the same. Now, how many of you guys actually look after APIs or write APIs? It's pretty good. So how do you actually know if your APIs are working correctly?
We don't get errors.
You find out from your customers when something is broken or someone complains to you, right?
Yeah.
All right. So what we're going to do is feel free to either go into that QR code or go to that URL. So that's Instruct. So that's where the lab will be sitting. So that lab will be available for a month after today as well. So if you wanted to go and do it in your own time, you can. Otherwise, just feel free to kind of watch along and kind of see what we do. And I think each of the tables has that as well on a printout, so if you need that URL.
So the QR code on the table is the same code that you see on the screen as well.
So when you actually go to that URL, what you'll end up with is you'll see something like this. And let's just go view content. So we'll actually get into that workshop itself. And so you should see something like that. And so this is the lab that we'll be going through today, the workshop. So we'll just kind of click into it.
It gives do we need to create an account or something to that effect?
Yeah, so you can just sign up for an Instruct one, use your personal email, there's no cost to it.
Awesome.
When you do get to this lab, you'll see there's a couple of links here. So the first one is go ahead and sign up for a free New Relic account. And the second one is actually a link to the set of slides that we'll be going through as well. So that way you have those slides available to you. And as I said before, you can kind of do that on your own time as you see fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and actually start the lab right now, just because the first step takes a few minutes to get going. So we'll get that kicked off and then we'll jump back into the slides. So what we're going to do is we're going to deploy a sample GCP Google Cloud Platform set of apps. But these are microservices that Google has published, and it's called a boutique sample app. It's a set of microservices that it's really useful for doing demos, and it's kind of what, whenever you see Google, it's what they use to kind of demo their platform. So these will be deployed in a kube environment in Instruct, pretty straightforward. And then we'll be going through and actually instrumenting that with OpenTelemetry. And we'll come back and talk a little bit about OpenTelemetry and why you may want to use OpenTelemetry. So when you're at this stage, it'll take about 5 to 10 minutes to actually create the environment. So I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but we'll jump back into this set of slides. As Jay kind of mentioned, if you are kind of following along and doing the lab yourself, partner up. Otherwise, just feel free to just watch and learn how you go. So this is the set of apps that we will be deploying. As I mentioned, it's a series of 11 microservices in different languages. It's a good example to see how different types of applications or services actually interact and talk to each other. All right. Now, one of the things we'll see here is, we have a couple of links here, and we'll come back to this as well. So what we're going to go through is we're going to share some material about OpenTelemetry. So before I go further, how many people are familiar with OpenTelemetry? Okay, and how many people actually use it today? No one yet. Okay.
That's very much in line with the general responses we get.
Yeah, so a lot of people have heard of OpenTelemetry. A lot of people are perhaps investigating it. There might be enterprise architecture teams in your workplaces that are looking at OpenTelemetry. but there's not actually that many companies out there that are actively utilizing it yet. It's still early on in the adoption stage. So we'll kind of go through that and kind of see why that is and what is the benefit of using something like OpenTelemetry. When you do have access to these slides, there's a number of links that we've included as well. So these are really good documentation, really good sets of source of information to get up to speed on OpenTelemetry. As I said, it's not something that you have to look at now, but if you want to learn more about it, we can go through that. So kind of going back to a 101, what is OpenTelemetry? So OpenTelemetry is a member of the CNCF, so Cloud Native Cloud Foundation. It was formed through the merger of OpenTracing and OpenCensus. Now, why do we need OpenTelemetry? So the idea behind OpenTelemetry is that previously we had different organizations, different vendors coming up with their own standards for how you should instrument APIs and instrument applications. So they have their own preferences on what instrumentation and what observability means. But that can obviously cause issues because how do you interoperate between those different sets of systems? So that's kind of where OpenTelemetry came in. It's a set of standards that if you follow, that everyone who's implementing OpenTelemetry, they will share the same context, same language, same conventions on how you do instrumentation. So the idea is that it's going to be interoperable. And it standardizes how you actually collect instrumentation data or telemetry data. And the most key benefit of this is once you instrument your applications and you collect that telemetry data, you can send that to any platform of choice. So whether it be New Relic or any other observability platform that supports OpenTelemetry. So it's really beneficial from a number of reasons. One is that it's the ubiquity of it, so better coverage for instrumentation. It's vendor neutral, which is what a lot of organizations out there that want to go down a future-proof path of observability, that's the reason why they like it. Because you're not tied into a particular vendor. The work that you do to do custom instrumentation is vendor neutral. So all you're really doing is writing that code once perhaps, and then all you do is choose where you want to send that data, whether that be New Relic or some other vendor. It's designed to be interoperable. So we want to be able to do end-to-end instrumentation. So a lot of business requirements are, I want to be able to see a transaction that comes in through a front end, whether it be a mobile app or a web page, and it's going to go through and traverse through multiple microservices through to the back end. And different parts of an organization may be in charge of those different sections, so they may have their own tools of choice. So where something like OpenTelemetry comes in is that it's interoperable. So everything can kind of flow through and you can see that end-to-end picture. And it's highly configurable, so you can choose exactly which types of data that you want to be able to capture. And some recent surveys from Gartner indicated that by 2025, which is not that far out, 70% of cloud-native application monitoring will use open source. So that's kind of the direction, that's kind of where organizations are going towards, is this open source mentality. With OpenTelemetry, there's a concept of a collector. And so what we'll go through is, on the left-hand side, we have OTLP, which stands for OpenTelemetry Protocol. And that can collect data on microservices, so your applications, but it can also collect infrastructure data as well. So how are those services actually running on the underlying Kubernetes environment, for example? And you can send that data directly to an end platform like New Relic, or you can actually send it to a collector. And what the collector allows you to do is allows you to do processing of that data. So there's some manipulation of that data, add additional metadata or attributes to that, do sampling, and then export that out to multiple locations. So you can send it to New Relic or to multiple other destinations as well. So why don't we all just jump onto OpenTelemetry, right? As you said, some of you have heard of OpenTelemetry. You probably have parts of your organization that's looking at OpenTelemetry. So why don't we all just embrace it, right? Now, it really comes down to two things, right? The first thing is, do you want to be able to customize everything, or do you really want an end product? So if you think about it, if you think about OpenTelemetry, think about it as a highly customizable thing where you're building everything from the ground up. So it gives you a lot of control but it means you have to do some additional work. Whereas something like an end product, something like New Relic, where you can actually deploy the New Relic agents, means that you know exactly what you're getting. It's really easy to get started, but you don't have as much finite control over exactly what you want to do. So it's a bit of a trade-off between, hey, I want to be very, very granular in what I collect, how I instrument my applications, and exactly what output I want, but it's going to require some additional work. Or I can go with a platform solution like New Relic, where we have our automatic agents that will go and auto-instrument your systems, but you don't have as much control over exactly what you get. The other key consideration is OpenTelemetry is still incubating. It's still maturing. So there are certain languages where it's close to maturity, so things like Java, .NET, but there are other languages where it's still not there yet. And so we will see OpenTelemetry become more and more mature, but it's still growing, still getting better.
And just to add to that point as well, the browser-based OTel, it's still in the very early stages. So if you're trying to collect, say, a real user metrics from an OTel collector, it is very sketchy at the moment, to say the least.
So really, you want to ask yourself a series of questions on, whether you should go, whether you want to go down the path of OpenTelemetry or not, right? Do you understand the differences between monitoring and observability? Do you understand the basics of metrics, logs, and traces? Do you understand the value of traces? Or how do you use traces today? Do you have experience in manual instrumentation? Do you have developers available to go and take cycles out of their feature function releases to do instrumentation? Is the app actually easy to instrument? Is it friendly for a custom instrumentation? Or do you not really have access to the source code? And is your environment tolerant to change? Right? So these are all kind of questions you have to ask when you're investigating, should I go down the path of OpenTelemetry for my observability strategy, or should I go and use something that's available already and off the shelf, something that's mature like New Relic? And as you can see, where OpenTelemetry is in that adoption curve, it's still kind of in that incubating stage where you have early adopters that are using it, but it hasn't caught on to the mainstream yet, and it will get there, but it's still going along that journey, right? So there are things that when you start using may not be fully baked yet, so it is something to consider. So what we're going to go through today is, we're going to go and, instrument an environment, but we also have an OpenTelemetry masterclass as well. And there's links that I shared earlier in the slides that does have, access to these masterclass. So if you wanted to go and get even more in depth in OpenTelemetry, you can go and do that as well. All right, so in terms of today's workshop agenda, what we're going to do is we're going to go and deploy that cloud-native online boutique shop, which we kind of started just before. And then we're going to go through and do some OpenTelemetry instrumentation of that environment. So let's go ahead and kind of see where we're at. All right, so if you are kind of following along, if you go back here, at this point, what's happened is we've gone ahead and actually deployed Kubernetes in a Minikube environment in Instruct, which is a web-based lab environment. So we'll go ahead and go start. And what we can see here is, hopefully my screen's decent to read. We can just go and do a ls to make sure we have a few things installed, so that all looks pretty good.
So once Kajan is going through all those commands, for people who joined it late, this is a hands-on workshop, and if you prefer to follow along, there is a sheet on the table there. There's a QR code on it. You can scan it. There's a link to Instruct Lab. You'll need two things. You need to register on Instruct, just your private email, Gmail is fine. And you need an account to New Relic, so you can register on New Relic for free as well. It should take you 2 minutes. But yeah, if you do that, you would exactly see the same steps on the screen as you follow along.
Yep. So we can see that we've got a node running. We've got some pods there, so we know that environment got deployed. So let's go ahead and go to the next part of this lab. There's only so much time we have. But there shouldn't be any Kubernetes deployment issues because that's all been scripted already, so it should be pretty straightforward. So let's jump in. And so the first thing that we need to do is, we've already got a kube environment up there. We want to set up some variables. So this is essentially going to tell this platform, where do we want to send this OpenTelemetry data that we're going to collect. We're going to specify that, and we're going to specify some API keys for New Relic because we want to collect OpenTelemetry instrumentation from these set of apps, send it to New Relic, and so we want to kind of set up some of those variables. So you'll see that I've got some variables here, but I think I've actually got that over here. So this is the set of variables. So you can see here, where the endpoints are. These are pointing to New Relic. So one of the first things that I need to do is go in and set some of these APIs. So I'm going to go back into New Relic. So if you've following along, sign up for a new free New Relic account. You can just use your personal email account, sign up for New Relic. And then if we go into here, we can see API keys. And I've got a bunch of API keys that I've just created. So I'm going to copy the key here. And I'm going to just paste that over here. All right, so we've got all of those applied. So the next thing that I'm going to do is go back to my lab. And I just want to paste that in here. So we're just setting up all those variables in my Kubernetes environment. So when this application is collecting OpenTelemetry data, it knows exactly where to send it and what API keys to use. So we've got that there. The next thing we're going to do is just going to run scaffold. So it's going to just start to compile the application that I have and get that deployed. So this will take basically a minute to get up and going. So we'll let that run.
If anyone's following along and stuck, come on and help.
Sorry?
If you're following along and if you're stuck on any of the steps.
Yeah, so it's creating the New Relic license key.
Okay.
So I've got to this point. Do I log in?
Yeah, please.
If I don't have an account, just create a free one. Yeah, okay, cool.
Anyone else have any questions while they're going through the lab? All right. So while we're waiting for that to get built, we'll just go through some kind of core concepts here. So when it comes to OpenTelemetry, you'll hear this term semantic conventions. So I talked earlier about how one of the benefits of OpenTelemetry is you've got these agreed upon standards. So that's what semantic conventions are. They're an agreed set of standards in terms of how what constitutes metrics, what naming conventions, what constitutes an error. So these are all the standards that everyone that goes ahead and uses OpenTelemetry is required to abide to, right? So it means that no matter what vendor you're using, it's all the same thing, right? So it's interoperable. I think everyone here should be aware of what APIs are, SDKs are, and then we have this concept of OTLP or OpenTelemetry protocol. So in most cases, you'll see organizations talk about, hey, we want to send OpenTelemetry data to a platform. So in this case, New Relic, and the way that you do that is through an OTLP endpoint. And so that's kind of it's an API endpoint that will receive OpenTelemetry data. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to get this set of microservices deployed. We'll be sending that data to New Relic, and so we'll be able to see what those services actually look like in New Relic. Again, we haven't used any New Relic specific or proprietary SDKs or coding or anything else like that. All we're doing is deploying OpenTelemetry and sending that data to New Relic. So just the same way you can send that to any place else, but we want to visualize that data in New Relic. So let's go back and see if this one is completed. So it's still deploying. It does take about a minute or so, or actually a few minutes. Sorry?
Not New Relic, then what else can you do?
Yeah, so it's any place that supports receiving data through an OTLP endpoint. So there might be other observability platforms that can accept that, or you may want to host it internally as well. But that's kind of where we come in. So with New Relic, we support using our own New Relic agents to collect data, but we also support OpenTelemetry as well to be able to collect data as well. While we're waiting for this to spin up and get deployed, any questions in general or about OpenTelemetry? I think earlier on, there were a few people that put up their hands for, you've heard of OpenTelemetry. I guess a question for you guys is, what's stopping you from using OpenTelemetry, or is that part of your roadmap to use OpenTelemetry in your organizations?
Just haven't gotten there yet.
Yep, fair enough, yeah. And is that something that you've already kind of done research on, playing around with? How advanced are you in terms of going down that path?
So right now we've done a lot of stuff with what's it called, Splunk. So using the logs from Splunk and just trying to get some data out from that. Also we've got Prometheus and Grafana for more infrastructure kind of data. So yeah, for us it's about just looking at maybe consolidating that, getting it all down into the one pipe, and then seeing what we can do with it after that.
Yep, makes sense. Anyone else?
So would the user end up with exactly the same things in New Relic if they use the Open API kind of approach versus your own SDKs?
It's a really good question. So as I mentioned earlier, right? So OpenTelemetry is still becoming mature. New Relic's APM product has been here for over a decade, right? So there are certain advantages today with New Relic's own agents, but OpenTelemetry is catching up, right? And that is, to be honest, that it is the future, is going down the path of OpenTelemetry. New Relic fully supports it. Today, if I was to do a like for like, I would say there are some gaps in OpenTelemetry, but in 12 months' time, it's probably going to be on par, or OpenTelemetry might even mature ahead. So it really depends on what your specific use cases are. Some customers, if you need to do custom instrumentation, they may look at it and say, hey, I need to write some custom code. Do I want to tie myself to a specific vendor's SDK and agents when I'm doing that? Or do I want to use OpenTelemetry, which is open source and I can be vendor neutral? So that might be a thought process. Another one is, hey, I need to get as much visibility into my apps today as quickly as possible. Do I want to go through the engineering cycles of doing OpenTelemetry custom instrumentation, or can I just deploy a New Relic agent and get the data straight away? Right? So there are decisions that you can kind of make on deciding which way to go. Some customers of ours have New Relic agents deployed in a large part of their environment, but they want to go through and do some custom instrumentation on a new application or new stack. So they may go with OpenTelemetry in that area, and everything is interoperable. So even if you have one set of applications or services that are using OpenTelemetry, the others are using New Relic, we can still stitch them all together and get that end-to-end view. So it looks like this is all being deployed. So let me go back into New Relic. So we can see here we've got a couple of APMs, we've got a couple of OpenTelemetry. So we can see some data coming in, right? So these are all services that currently we instrumented, and it's sending data through OpenTelemetry into New Relic. So if we have a look at this particular service, so you can just see kind of throughput is ramping up as we just deployed that. You can see response times. So if we go in and look at distributed tracing. So this is an area where we do want to see how these microservices are talking to each other. All right, so let's go ahead. You can see this is from a minute ago where I just deployed. Oops. I think this might still be coming in.
It's still open.
Yeah.
So we generally do this lab in 2 hours. We're trying to compress that into a 40-minute time slot, so please bear with us.
So we'll just kind of give it a second while it continues to build out. So you can see, what's happening here. We can see, this particular service, which is called the shipping service, is, interacting with these two other services as well. So we can kind of start to build that end-to-end view. let me go back and see if we have some traces. Okay, there we go. So it's kind of started to build that up together. So what we can see here is, we've got here 8 entities, which means there are 8 services or microservices that are all talking to each other. And all we've done so far is just tell those applications to send that OpenTelemetry data to New Relic. We haven't done any custom instrumentation yet. It's been pretty straightforward. And so we can see, there's a front end service, and it's making a number of calls to some back end services. And that's all pretty good. That's all pretty powerful. And down here we can see exactly what that distributed trace is, and we can see all the different methods that are being called as part of it. All right. So and what New Relic's also able to do is we can do the in-context stuff where we can combine telemetry data, distributed traces with log events as well. So this is pretty powerful because now you don't have to jump to a different system or a different tool to look at your logs. We know that for this individual transaction, these were the specific log events that were generated for them as well. So it makes it really easy from a troubleshooting perspective.
So if there was an error associated there, you'd see that log with the error contained in it right there on that specific trace.
Is it also OpenTelemetry logging? Is it also OpenTelemetry logging?
Yep.
It is.
So what we're going to do here, so we've kind of got that first part of that instrumentation done, which is basically just send that data to New Relic. The next step in this lab is what we're going to do is we're going to actually do some custom instrumentation because we want to send some additional data to New Relic. We want to capture some additional data, some additional error data, some additional attributes about what type of transactions that the customer is processing as well. So we're going to end this. All right. So we're going to go next. And so in my next set of actions that I'm going to do, we're going to cheat a little bit because obviously we don't have a whole bunch of time. So these are the specific steps that we're going to go through in the next little bit. But rather than making these changes one by one, I've actually got a completed source code file which I'm just going to copy over. Right? But essentially what this is going to do is we're going to add a particular delay in one of these methods, so we can see how that delay actually looks in New Relic in terms of that distributed trace we saw earlier. We're going to add some additional attributes to our spans. So if you want to send some business context data, for example, so think about things like customer information, customer order details. That way you can at least correlate that back to maybe some business context that you're after. And the last thing is we're gonna force an error. So we're going to force an error, and then we're going to see what that looks like in New Relic as well. So if you're following along, we've got a link here, which is essentially that code file with all of these things included. But I'm going to jump back. So we're going to just setting up the next challenge. So that's ready. So we're going to go start. Now, one of the first things that I need to do is I need to reset those environment variables, just because instruct is a bit weird in this sense that it loses those environment variables in between exercises. So we're setting that again. And we're going to run scaffold dev. And we can go to our code editor. So what we're going to edit is we're going to go to source. We're going to go to shipping service. And then we have a go file main.go. So this is the source code file that we're going to edit, and we're going to add some custom instrumentation using OpenTelemetry SDKs and libraries. So what I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit and say, I've got this file here, which actually has all of those additional things that I've already kind of written. So we're going to kind of like, if this was a cooking show, we're going to kind of go to the pre-made cake. So we're going to copy all that.
And how to write those custom instrumentations, it's all heavily documented on the hotel website as well.
So I've just kind of pasted that in. So we'll quickly kind of go through what we've actually done here. So you can see here, we've added reference to an hotel attributes. there. Going down, we're starting to build a trace. We're setting a custom attribute. So what we're doing here is we want to, for these traces that are being captured, we want to send the shipping address details, just because it might help us in troubleshooting. But we can really set any type of custom attributes or any business attributes, right? So you might have customer ID or something like that, as long as it's not PII data, which I wouldn't recommend sending. But you may have, transaction value, you may have customer cohort or category, or whatever makes sense from your business perspective in terms of the business context that you want to capture. So we're going to go through that, and you can see here we're also kind of just adding a fake error. So this is going to start throwing some errors, so we can kind of see what that actually looks like when we instrument this. So we've got that. So I'm going to save that. And this lab kind of goes through and tells you exactly what you were doing if you want to do these line by line. So we're adding a delay, we're building some spans, we're adding some attributes, we're adding an error, and we're setting some statuses. So what you'll notice is that Scaffold will automatically kind of rebuild that. It'll take about a minute or so for that to get updated. But if we go back and just refresh, now while we wait for this to start sending us the updated data, any questions around the stuff that we've kind of covered? I know it was pretty quick, but any questions around why you may want to send some custom attributes or business context? Any questions from the group? Nope.
You're doing an awesome
Makes
job.
sense.
No
Huh?
questions. You're doing an awesome job. There's no questions.
I should have come with like some pre-canned questions.
So, what is the maturity model of OpenTelemetry on mobile native? Like, I know you're talking about microservices, Java, .NET. How about mobile native apps like Android?
I think that's still pretty early on in the maturity level. So, with OpenTelemetry, because it's a community-driven initiative essentially, right? It's the community that's deciding, what's becoming more mature, who is contributing to what parts of it. So that's why things like Java and .NET, because there's a pretty big ecosystem around developers for that, that's becoming mature a lot faster rate. Whereas some of the other areas, like you mentioned, like mobile native apps, are still very, very early on. And there's also a difference between, if we're talking about OpenTelemetry, there's different areas. So there's metrics, there's traces, there's logs. And each one of them has their own level of maturity for the languages as well. So in some instances, a lot of the, so traces are the most mature of all of those things. Metrics is coming along, and logs are probably the furthest mature along those lines as well. But because it is a community-driven project, we will start to see more and more adoption, and things will get adopted really quickly, and things will get mature really quickly as well. But at the moment, it's still early days for some of those things. So I think before, when we had a look at these lists, there was only about 3 services here. It's because as these services are spinning up and as more traffic is being sent to them, they're showing up in New Relic as well. So you can see kind of that getting built out more and more. Okay, so let's go back in here. Looks like we have something from about a minute ago. So let's have a look at that. Yep, still not ready. Okay. So here now we can see a few different things, right? So now we can see that there's an error that's been picked up. And we can see these anomalous spans. So this is basically New Relic saying, we introduced an error in our, we introduced a timer in our code before. So this is New Relic automatically saying, hey, we noticed that there's some anomalous behavior happening in these services, right? So it's New Relic automatically AI going in and saying, hey, these services or these transactions are taking a bit longer than what they normally take. So that's where the advantage of something like New Relic as a platform comes in, because it's not just collecting the data, it's what you do with the data as well. So we can see that. We can also see that we've got an error. So this was the error that we added in the previous step, and it was added to the ship order detail. So you can see that being pulled out. And we can see here what that error message is. In this case, the zip code was invalid. And then if we go to our attributes, we can see here now we have those custom attributes that we sent through as well. So things like, so the address, the city, were custom attributes that we had chosen, and we had sent that through. So that's how easy it is to be able to go through. There's a few lines of code that you add into your application itself, so you can send that data to a rich platform like New Relic, where you can very easily visualize that data, but you can also send business contextual data as well. So when you are troubleshooting, or someone calls your help desk and says, hey, I try to place an order, it's not going through, what's happened? If you have details of who the customer is, you can go back into a platform like New Relic and actually search for that attribute. Or you can start to see, for all these different errors that I'm getting, is there a pattern? Perhaps all the errors are happening when I'm trying to ship to New South Wales. Maybe there's something wrong in my API in terms of how I'm actually processing orders for that particular state. So you can use those attributes and those custom attributes to also do some correlation to figure out what are the patterns, why am I getting errors, to help you solve that as well.
And just on this page, one of the biggest challenges I have with developers are not trying to specify what the error message, the details contained within the error message. Most of the times when we go out and troubleshoot something, you come to this screen, and if you can just click on that performance and see the error details touch. A lot of times developers just tend to write or copy the error code in the error message itself. So over here you can see it says error, and we've clearly identified that the zip code is invalid. So based on that, operations person can go out and identify and fix an issue, as compared to error.
Yeah. And then one of the other things I mentioned earlier is we can do in context, which is a really powerful capability of New Relic as a platform. So we can start to see the logs for log events for this individual transaction, right? So a lot of developers, if they're not necessarily throwing errors in their code, they might just be logging those things out as well. So we can actually pull those in and see those details as well. So we can send, we can see exactly what's going on, what information is there. Hopefully there's enough information either in the error message or in the logs to actually help troubleshoot what the root cause is there. I'm just going to pause there. Any questions on kind of what we've shown so far? Does that kind of make sense?
Sorry if I missed this, but
Yep.
when you had that error, were you able to see like the line of code that came from?
In this particular one, what we have is, let's have a look. So this is just going to show you the error message, but because we're in here, we can see exactly which method it was coming from. Now, what we can also do is, hopefully we should be able to see that error message in our errors inbox, so we don't have it in here, but otherwise we would be able to go back into transactions and see exactly kind of what transactions are there. In some of these cases, you may be sending the stack trace as well as part of that error that you're capturing. So that stack trace will have the lines of code that, in your source code, or which library, which method, the line of code as well. So it really depends on kind of, it's a combination of what's captured by default out of box, as well as how you enrich the data that you're sending to New Relic as well. Any other questions? It's been good so far.
Where exactly do I put that NRL query? What is that going to NRL?
Oh, right. So that NRQL query, you can go into query your data here, and you can go to query builder. So I think the query is just saying from spans, select star. It's just to see, if data is coming into the platform. Yep. So we were sending spans, so we can say select start. So NRQL is New Relic's query language. For those familiar with like SQL, it's very kind of similar in terms of the context and the syntax. So we have a pretty rich backend. You can think about all of these different things like span, like a span as a table in SQL. So we can write queries for those to see what data is being captured, and we can do things like add where we can look at whatever it may be. So it's a pretty powerful query language. So it's not just the visualizations that you saw earlier, but you can actually query the underlying data as well. So that's really powerful. And then the good thing is based on this, we can then also create charts pretty easily as well. So maybe we just wanted to see from span. I want to just do a count. So this is essentially kind of the spans that we're collecting, which is indicative of the traffic that's kind of coming into our platform. So we visualize that really easily. I can actually give that a chart name and actually save that to a dashboard pretty easily as well. That dip is where we made the change to the code and we rebooted and redeployed. So you can see that drop there as well. So hopefully that was pretty clear in terms of what the benefit of OpenTelemetry is, how you can actually instrument your application, your APIs, why that's going to help you in terms of a troubleshooting process. You can see exactly how those systems and how those applications are working together. Now, what we can also see here is, let me just refresh this page. We can see a pretty basic map here of this particular service, which is called the shipping service, is called by two other services, and is hosted by one bit of infrastructure here. So we have that view available, and so it makes it really easy to understand kind of dependencies between your services as well. And certainly the view that we saw earlier when we come into a distributed trace, and we look at a particular transaction. This is a pretty good, easy representation of exactly how my microservices or my APIs are talking to each other. We can see the requests coming in from the front end, and we can hover over any one of these, and we can see the golden signals for those. So what's the throughput, what's the response time, what's the latency. We can dive in more as well, and we can see exactly how many. So from this particular one, which is the front end. We can see there are calls going out to each of these services, and then from the checkout service, for example, there are calls that are again going out to other backend services. So it's really easy and really quick in terms of being able to do this visualization. So when you're trying to see that end-to-end view of where things might be slowing down, where the bottleneck might be in your architecture, this is pretty easy to identify, right? We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'll just quickly kind of jump back. So we kind of came up to this level. We were able to see pretty easily this type of view, identify where there may be delays, latency in your code, New Relic automatically picking it up. We've thrown an error. We've seen how New Relic can visualize that error, how quickly it is, how you can see the error message, how you can see custom attributes, business context as well. And we can see logs in context, so being able to correlate an individual transaction with the related log events as well. There is a part two. Obviously, we won't have time to go through that, but if you do have access to the deck, which you should all have access to, if you did want to kind of follow through on your own time, you can go through, do further work as well. So we've just seen here how to collect application data, so errors, performance, throughput, but we can also use the collector to collect infrastructure data as well using OpenTelemetry. And in the example that we said, we were actually capturing 100% of our traces. So 100% of those spans and traces that were coming through, we were capturing. But a lot of times you don't want to capture 100%. Maybe you just want to sample. So that's where the collector comes in, because you can say, I want to just do a 10% sample or a 1% sample, or you can do more complex rules by saying, hey, if attribute A equals a certain value, then keep that or discard it. So we can do more complex things about what sampling we do and how we sample as well. So we'll look at wrapping up there, and feel free to kind of go through the rest of the lab in your own time if you want. And yeah, but I'll kind of open it up for any kind of final questions, any thoughts.
So what's best practices with regards to capturing data? Because I know that if you collect data, and let's say that there's a specific data type that you want to look for later, which you don't know that you actually need, if you've been collecting, then you might not be able to get the precision that you're looking for. So with regards to OpenTelemetry, what's kind of the best practice?
Yeah, so I would say it's not necessarily just limited to OpenTelemetry, right? It's probably kind of a general rule in terms of telemetry data, observability data. What do you want to collect? So if you think about any observability, the idea is that it should provide you insights into how your systems are working, and certainly from a proactive perspective as well. So give you that early warning before you even thought about what types of alerts and thresholds to do. It should be able to. You should have enough data for it to be automatically using AI tell you, hey, this is deviating from what it was before. So that's one aspect. So you want to have that type of data. The second aspect is, you may have some known issues that you're anticipating for and you might be capturing, but you may also have a lot of unknown issues as well, right? So you want to have enough data to be able to go through and troubleshoot those issues down the road. Cool. So traces is a really good example in that it probably doesn't make sense to capture 100% of traces because you're going to end up with a lot of data that's probably not useful. So sampling of traces makes a lot of sense. What some customers do is, let's say you've just pushed out a new version of your application or your services. Maybe for the first day or so, you capture 100% or a higher percentage, and then you wind that back once it's more stable, right? So you can be more creative in terms of how you throttle, how you sample as well. Because if something is stable, you don't need to capture 100% of traces. You can kind of dial that back a little bit. But certainly, traces are really useful. Logs are really useful. Error information, metrics. Metrics tells you when something is wrong. It's not necessarily going to help you find the root cause of that. Traces and logs, traces in particular, will be very helpful for that because you can identify exactly which services, which parts of your code, which methods are throwing potential errors.
Yeah, cool.
Any other questions?
And how are you doing that throttling at runtime?
So that's where the collector comes in. So we didn't deploy the collector in this case because we're just sending the data directly to the New Relic endpoint. But you can deploy an OpenTelemetry collector, which is what the next part of the exercise would be. So the collector is, think about it as, you can send from multiple applications or microservices to that collector as a single point. The collector is then capable of doing, adding attributes to the data, massaging that data, and also deciding where to send that data to. But in that collector itself, you can also set up sampling rules as well. All right. Any other questions from anyone? Awesome. So I think there's actually a cocktail out right now, so I won't keep you guys from it. Thank you very much for joining. Hopefully this is insightful.
Thanks
Thank you all.